Sure do.
They're recording. I'm gonna turn it off.
I always expect Chris to come through, right? He's still got 1 minute. Because oftentimes he does come right at the last minute.
No, Chris won't be here.
He won't be here?
He's still on hiatus.
I know, but I thought he was, didn't think he went.
I don't know for sure. I'm joking.
I'll let you know. I think
that clock is fast too, because my phone says 1:27, so he's
Oh.
got 3 minutes.
All
I'm
official.
also waiting still on paramedic. It might not show up right until.
Oh, you, what I did?
Are the minutes for Jan? The minutes.
Been lucky. So the last 3 years. The really was previous. Good spot.
I think I'm just gonna go by this clock. I usually go by this clock.
Okay, well, we might have to stall a little.
Why?
It's paramount.
The paramedics have been on the call.
Oh,
So we can just.
all right. Well, let's wait a couple minutes then.
Yeah. That's all right.
Okay.
You're the main presenter, otherwise you'll have to.
Ooh.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a little problem.
Otherwise, you'll have to read these yourself.
Yeah.
And then
Right.
so it becomes. Which will be nature.
So counselors and commissioners, please make sure if you're gonna make any comments that you hold the microphone towards you to speak so that Zoom can hear and we can record well, please. Thank you.
That means you, Jerry.
Dana, do you know if they're trying to get on or?
Well, my guess is they're probably not gonna get on until right at 1:30. So that's 2 minutes. That's my guess.
Okay, well, tell me when you,
I can text them. We'll see them pop up. It's Brian and Emily.
so who's with the telephone there?
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye. Steve,
Pretty good, I'd say. You know, the holidays weren't bad, the past, but January's not pretty good. How are your holidays?
I thought I saw Steve Friedland up, oh, there, ha, I said he'd be here right at the last minute. Sure enough.
Family is down in Santa Fe?
I guess I lost my best. Hold on. So, yeah. And then his
Thought you were
brother
on
was there.
vacation.
Yeah, I am on vacation. I just.
Back in New
Did
Jersey.
he get one of these documents?
But yeah, it was fun. Had fun.
Do you have one?
I don't think there is.
Yeah.
Here's one.
It wasn't really long enough, but.
He goes,
Okay.
Art galleries,
okay,
Santa Fe.
Now, is this the,
That was.
now are we ready?
yeah.
Okay.
Connecting with audience.
All right, I'm going to call to order the joint meeting of the City Council and the Planning Commission to talk about the City of Bandon's Transportation System Plan. Richard, do you have the roll call? All right, and the discussion, I'll turn it over to Dana.
Awesome. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you all for coming today. So this is a joint meeting of the Planning Commission and the City Council for our transportation system plan update. We were fortunate to get grant funding for this project through the Transportation and Growth Management Program, which is a joint ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation, and DLCD, Department of Land Conservation and Development Program. And so we have been working through the public outreach, existing conditions conditions. You'll hear all about it today. We are working with our consultant team, Parametrics. You'll see Emily and Ryan up on the screen. They're going to present to you. And then we also have two folks from ODOT here, Mike Baker and Tom Guevara in the back, who I believe are doing the other half of the presentation. And then we'll have some opportunity for discussion at the end. So you'll hear from them and then we'll have time to talk. I don't know if there's a preference from Emily and Ryan about whether or not we can stop you mid-presentation to ask questions, or if you'd prefer we keep them till the end.
I'm happy to answer questions along the way.
Okay, I will interrupt you then if we have any questions in here. So with that, I'll let you guys take it away. Do you have a presentation? Okay. On your end.
Yeah, let us pull that up just 1 second here.
Great, cool. Oh, and I guess while they're doing that, I'll just tell you, you have a copy of the presentation in front of you, so you can follow along in case there's anything you can't see on the screen. We'll also email you a copy of it afterwards in case there's any pictures you want to look into more. And then on your way out the door, there's a memo prepared by the consultant team that you can grab that sort of summarizes all the information. So if you don't digest it all during the presentation, you'll have that for you later.
Almost there, 1 second, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Can you guys hear us all right as well?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, we had some sound issues at our last meeting, but we can hear you loud and clear this time. We practiced.
Okay,
Okay.
can everybody
we
see that up on the screen?
Yeah.
Great. All right, so we have, we have an hour, right?
That's correct. I
Okay,
think
so
folks can stay a little longer if need be.
we'll definitely try to respect everybody's time. We have a lot of content to discuss today, but really this is about getting feedback from you. So we'll try not to talk too much and definitely leave plenty of time for discussion. But our agenda for today is to talk a little bit about the transportation system plan for your community that we are working with Dana and you all and the public to update. And at this first meeting, we really want to cover the transportation issues and needs that we see with the city. And this list of issues and needs has been compiled from technical analysis, which we'll talk about, but also outreach and input from people in the community and stakeholders and ODOT. We'll talk a little bit about issues on US 101 specifically, and I know Mike and Tom are in the room to help with that discussion. And then we have a handful of discussion questions that we may not need if once we get into this. If we'll see how the conversation goes, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. And I have the presentation up on my screen, so I can't see anybody or anything. So if Dana, if something comes up, just shout and I'll pause. Okay. I guess I should have introduced myself first. Ryan Farncombe. I'm a transportation planner with Parametrics. I'm the consultant project manager for the transportation system plan update. My colleague Emily is on the call as well, and I'll let her introduce herself in just a second when she gives her segment of the presentation. I think you know all know Dana well. And then I guess I wanted to pause just for a second if Tom and Mike wanted to introduce themselves before we go on further.
I'm Mike Baker. I'm the I'm Mike Baker. I'm the region planning manager for ODOT.
I'm Tom Guevara. I'm the agency project manager on your TSP update for ODOT. I'm also the senior transportation planner.
All right, thanks guys. Okay, so first, a bit about transportation system plans in general. So Bandon does have a transportation system plan. It's a bit dated at this point. It was done about nearly 25 years ago. But transportation system plans address transportation needs now and into the future. And generally, when we talk about the future, we're looking 20 years out. So we're looking to around the year 2045 when we're looking at transportation needs and issues. Transportation system plans have projects. So these are things like new sidewalks that address gaps in the pedestrian network, for example. They also have programs. These might be things that we're not constructing per se, but the parking management is a good example of a program that's often included in TSPs. There's policies typically that we also update as part of this process. And then we're also going to take a look at standards, for example, local street standards for new streets. TSPs look at all modes of transportation, and the transportation mode is just a way of getting around, right? So we're looking at when we look at the transportation system plan, we're considering people walking, people driving, people riding a bike, using the bus, freight, and deliveries. As part of this transportation system plan effort, we know there are a few things that are top of mind for the community. One of those is US 101 and balancing the needs of everybody who uses that facility. Developing streets that work for everybody, no matter how they want to get around. Making sure we are considering and addressing tourism travel impacts. And then also looking at more or how we can create new viable connections and increase street connectivity in and through town. The TSPs, they contain a number of different pieces. One of those is goals and objectives, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. Those goals and objectives help us guide the process throughout. They also help us select and evaluate projects and programs for the TSP update, in addition to feedback from you and from the public at large. We'll also look at funding as part of the transportation system plan. What is the local funding picture? What might it be in the future? And what is the gap in terms of transportation funding needs, and how might we solve that? And then lastly, another piece we will look into is updates to city code to make sure that the city is in compliance with statewide rules, in particular the transportation planning rule, and any rules, for example, around new development and the kinds of transportation investments that developers end up assisting the city with. So a quick word about the TSP decision-making structure. So the project management team is really Dana, Emily, Tom, and I. We have a project advisory committee that has met a couple times already, and we're going to provide you a little bit about their feedback here today. And that advisory committee, which is composed of stakeholders from across the community, is advising us and you throughout the process about what the needs, issues, and solutions are. And then obviously the Planning Commission will review the TSP update as we get further along and make a recommendation to the City Council, who ultimately decides whether to adopt the updated TSP. And all along the way that you see there on the left, this whole process is being informed by public input. So we are a third of the way through the TSP process. We've gotten to the point where we've established goals and objectives. We have got a good handle on existing and future conditions analysis, and this conversation today will help us flesh out that further. But the next really key piece of the project that will start here soon is looking at improvements, so solutions, construction projects, programs, things like that that address those issues and needs we're going to talk about today. The goal is to have this whole process wrapped up a little bit later in the year. Once we talk about improvements, we'll have another touch point with the public to review those improvements and determine really what is preferred and should be included in the TSP. And then we'll draft that updated TSP for review and adoption this fall. And we'll have a couple of several more touch points with the Planning Commission and the Council along the way as well. Before I talk about the goals, are there any questions or comments about the kind of overall process or what TSPs are about?
I don't think there are any questions.
Thanks, Dan. Okay, I won't read these out loud to you word for word, but I did want to show these goals. And again, there's 5 different goals, and along with these goals, we've also developed some evaluation criteria. And again, these are important because they kind of guide us throughout the TSP process, and especially important in terms of selecting projects and programs to address the issues and needs we identify. So again, I won't read them out loud necessarily, but I'll pause for just a second so you can digest them. Okay, and Dana, let me know if there's any comments or questions about the goals.
I don't think there are any questions or comments, but I'm looking around in case anyone has anything, chime in. Nothing.
All right, Emily, I think I'm gonna turn it over to you here.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. As Ryan mentioned, I'm Emily Ministo Myers. I'm assisting the TSP development effort for this project. So just this month, we wrapped up public outreach milestone number 1. So this was kind of the first step in sharing what we've learned so far with the public. We conducted those public advisory committee meetings. The first was in June, the second was in November. We also completed some community representative interviews. These we actually talked on the phone to some folks just to kind of confirm that we were looking at the right issues and needs and focusing on the important aspects of getting around town in Bandon. And then we had an online open house. Oh, can you click to the next slide, please? Which we had open from November 1st and just closed, I think, last week. And this was a really great way to hear from people in Bandon just about what their priorities are, what they see as being the most important issues in town. People really seem to like the comment map. It was really interesting to be able to click on these little points and see exactly locations that people felt like needed to have some improvement or just to look at more critically. Next slide. And some of the common themes from all of that outreach, from the PAC meetings, the open house, and the community representative interviews, were definitely a focus on safety on US 101. So that was pretty much first and foremost on people's minds. Walking and biking connections, so how to get around town safely, more easily. Multimodal conflicts, so this kind of also sort of focused on US 101, but then also expanded to look at Beach Loop Drive, which came up a lot, and Seabird. So those 3 roadways with multimodal conflicts were definitely common themes. People also wanted increased transportation options. So along with walking and biking, people vocalized the desire to have better connections, both within the city, so kind of bringing up that trolley that used to run in Bandon, and also intercity connections. A lot of people brought up getting to medical appointments out of town, along with just more information about getting around and different options. Also, tourism season, people definitely were concerned about traffic and parking. And again, this kind of came up both in the conversations that we had in that comment map, and then also in responses to survey questions. So existing conditions, we, besides talking to people, actually did some in-depth analysis about what's going on the transportation system in Bandon. So first off, the street network, as you all may know, there's definitely a limited number of north, south, and east-west connections, especially when we look at the donut hole. So kind of focusing on potential ways to address connectedness and roadway connections in this area. Conflicts between vehicle traffic and pedestrians and bicyclists on US 101. And then also US 101 not meeting state standards. This is something that the folks from ODOT will have a little more discussion on, but definitely one of the forefront needs that we talked about with issues on US 101. Ryan, I think
Okay.
you're going to tackle this one.
So a little bit more about 101 and some of the things we're considering. One thing I want to note here is that US 101 is a reduction review route. And so what that means in a nutshell is that it's an important route for freight vehicles. And because it's a reduction review route, we have to be very careful with actions or improvements to US 101 that might affect or alter the freight carrying capacity of the roadway. So for example, something that might, a consideration there might be, for example, if we were looking at median islands, refuge islands for new pedestrian crossings, that might trigger some discussion about how that does or does not affect the ability of freight to move in the corridor. So I mentioned this just because it's an important consideration for us as we think about the future of 101. There's also, we've also heard about congestion from turning freight trucks on US 101. And then one other note related to freight specifically is that we've heard from folks, especially in downtown, in Old Town, talk about a lack of truck or freight loading zones where there's vehicles sometimes blocking the road, things like that. So issues and needs, safety, and this is, there's a lot on US 101 on this page, but this is intended to be more about safety broadly. But it's worth noting that most of the crashes found in the community are along US 101. And you see there that 11th Street to Face Rock Creamery has the highest number of crashes. There's a couple of locations where crash rates exceed what would be expected for that type of intersection. And those are up there on the screen there, Beach Loop at Seabird, and the intersection on 101 with Oregon 42S. So those locations in particular are places where we definitely want to look hard at safety solutions. As we've already noted, it can be stressful for people to walk across US 101. And there's a significant distance in some places between those marked or improved crossings on one. And this map provides a little bit more data on where those crashes are happening. So you can see a lot of them are concentrated along US 101, and that's for the years 2016 to 2020 was our data look. In terms of traffic, I think one thing we've heard from everybody we've talked to on the project, right, is that during high tourist season that there are concerns about congestion and parking in the community. When we look at how US 101 intersections are performing relative to state standards, all of the intersections actually perform within acceptable limits of congestion. That doesn't mean that there's not times of year where we know things get very busy and they do get congested. The other side of that issue is parking. Again, we've heard that in the summer, parking can be an issue, especially in Old Town and along Beach Loop Drive. We've heard about a lack of signage, so potential confusion from people who are trying to find parking. Where is the parking? How do I get to it? And then also a lack of comfortable crossings near some parking lots. Emily, is this back to you or me? I can't see the notes.
I think so. Yeah. I can take it from here. So again, going back to what we heard from people when we interviewed, a lot of folks generally stated that Bandon is pretty walkable. The main thing that came up was wanting safer crossings for both people walking and biking across US 101. There also were some sidewalk gaps that we saw from doing our analysis and also from talking to folks. So Beach Loop Road was one that was really important. 11th Street has sidewalks on one side, but some people expressed that it would be nice to have sidewalks on both sides. 8th Street near the schools, Oregon Ave, so kind of just providing a connection between the park and schools area, connecting up to Old Town without having to walk on US 101, and then Jetty Road out to the park. And then also just there's not much in the ways of street lighting outside of Old Town, so people expressed that they would feel more comfortable walking at night if there was some better street lighting provided. So another element was the bike network. Most roads in Bandon don't have bike facilities, so it's really just that one stretch along US 101. And we looked at different possibilities for adding bike lanes, but we also looked at some streets in Bandon being candidates for shared bikeways or neighborhood greenways, which are, we'll kind of get into that in a little bit, but these are kind of quieter streets that may have some traffic coming and some other improvements to make it a quiet street for people of all ages and abilities to bike on. And this was kind of stemming from a desire that was expressed by people wanting a more interconnected bicycle network, not just on US 101, but through and between Bandon's neighborhoods and having bikeways that connect to key destinations around town. Another thing to mention is that the transportation planning rule does require transportation facilities for biking and pedestrian on collectors, which US 101 is a collector. So we are going to be taking a look at bicycle facilities on US 101.
And really just a quick note, it's and collectors and arterials.
And arterials.
And
Yes.
US 101's an arterial.
Sorry, yes. For public transportation, the Bandon Dial-A-Bus, the people who use it really like it, but a lot of folks express that they don't really know much about the Dial-A-Bus. There's not as much information as they felt like there could be. A lot of people don't know that Dial-A-Bus exists or how to use it. And it also requires riders to plan ahead, so scheduling ahead of time, which isn't always the easiest for people to do. So people wanted kind of a way to get around town in a smaller local way. They express really enjoying the tourist trolley or a local shuttle to key destinations. And then we also talked to people who wanted some better inner city public transportation. Again, I mentioned this earlier, but medical appointments was something that came up a few times. And then some people talking about how living and working in Bandon, people who work outside of the city, it would be great if they didn't have to drive every time coming in for work. And then the one bus stop that's at Rays that has the inner city transit connection is largely unmarked. I think it's just a sign and there's no seating there. So looking at improving the actual bus stop that's there. So future conditions is a way for the project team to look at what the city might look like in the future if it's accounting for completed or planned transportation improvements. And these are ones that have a committed funding source. So looking at what the transportation system would look like in 2045 if only the projects that are planned and funded are completed. And since there were no planned and funded changes to the roadway capacity or to traffic patterns, we didn't make any changes to the roadway network when our team was doing traffic modeling. So from the results, we saw that the intersections continue to perform within the mobility targets that we looked at in the existing conditions. Although again, mentioning that during high tourism seasons, congestion could still be a problem.
Emily, can I just stop right there? Because I got very confused about this one, so I want to dumb it down because I feel like I didn't understand it the first time. So in case anyone else is not understanding, what they're doing is saying if we did nothing right now and our transportation system stayed exactly the same, but we grew like our population and our property all built out, where would the deficiencies be in the system? So, we had some comments about this all along of pretty much, I think it was like the transit was deficient and other things were deficient, but Highway 101, like we looked at the intersections, those are not deficient. So they are operating at the standard required by ODOT. So I just want to make that clear. That's if we did nothing, they still meet targets. If we grow for 20 years, is that the time frame?
Mhm.
Okay, thanks. Did I get that correct?
Yes, and
Okay,
thank
thank
you.
you.
It's a lot of weird, complicated wording, so I appreciate you further explaining that. And now I'm going to hand it over to, I think Mike is going to tackle this section.
Mike, will you come sit here so they can hear you on the microphone? Sorry to put you on the spot.
So I'm, again, for the record, I'm Mike Baker. I'm the planning manager for ODOT and one of the tourists that comes in, congest the town a little bit sometimes in the summertime. So I appreciate, getting to come here again today. So, 101, has a number of, different sections, different section widths across it. So if we start down at the south, we had just, I want to say recently, but that was probably almost 20 years ago, widened the 13th to Seabird portion, out to 3 lanes with some adjoining bike lanes and sidewalks there. As we get into the downtown here, near City Hall and around the curve there, we go down to, about a 4-lane, section. Or is it a 5-lane? It's a 5-lane section. 5-lane section on that part. No bike lanes, sidewalks. Sometimes we have utility poles in the sidewalks. So not always easy to get to. It's you have the curve and the hill, which make it also a little bit difficult. And then as we come down toward the cheese factory down by Fillmore, it goes to about 4 lanes. It kind of looks like there may be some width in that section for a bike lane, but maybe just on one side with restriping. And then as we turn that corner there by 42S and start heading up toward the grocery store and toward Pollard's Beach State Park, it's I think about a 3-lane section in there, and then goes out to I think a 4. Is it a 4-lane? Yeah, after that. So. So there are various widths to deal with, and not a lot of room. And as Ryan talked about, this is a freight reduction route, which means we look at some of the, you don't always see it because sometimes some of this stuff comes in the middle of the night, but some of these big electrical transformers can be, 23, 24 feet wide. And so just, you're making sure that these kind of loads that have to travel 101, since it really is no alternate route, that they're still able to get through. That doesn't mean that we can't do things. It just means that we have to make sure that those type of loads can still be accommodated. And then there's some provisions in the law for things that if we wanted to do something that reduced it, curb extensions, different things that or median islands, things that might restrict that type of movement. Even if it's 60 feet, but we only need the 24 feet, we still have to go through a process with some advisory groups and approval from the Oregon Transportation Commission before we could actually proceed. So any questions on that? We know that there's a lot of issues with pedestrians crossing. In fact, as I was telling the project management team, we don't typically fund transportation system plans for smaller communities like Bandon. But we've heard from your citizens and from you about the pedestrian issues and some of the crossings. There was a fatality a few years ago. And so we've made, and ODOT had came in to talk to the city council about reducing lane widths and you know what, we hadn't really studied it as much as we should have. And so for those reasons, we wanted to take a step back and take a look at what are the issues and what is it that you as a community want to accomplish. We recognize that yes, we have freight concerns, but you also have concerns on how people move around your town in terms of bicycling and walking and getting safely across the highway. And so how do we accomplish that? And so that's what this is, an opportunity to take a look at what are those alternatives? How do we do that? How do we best manage the roadway that not only meets our needs, but meets your needs? And on top of that, you have a tourism aspect. So, you know, it gets quite a bit busy here in the summertime as people come to your town and enjoy it. But how do they get around? And so this is that opportunity to take a look at that and figure out what's going to work for everyone. So I used to always say, you know, the engineering solution is not always the best solution. It's the one we all come to that we can all come together on. So we take a look at a diverse group of stakeholders and people that are vested in how you move around this town, and that's what we want to hear. We want to work with that to come up with a solution that you all can agree to. So, any questions?
Well, I have one question. The Fillmore traffic light, that happens, the fire chief was down there one day at the scene of an accident, and he and I were talking, and he said this is absolutely the most dangerous intersection anywhere in Bandon, anywhere near. And it's so confusing because people think they have a green light and they don't, and there's many accidents down there. And is there any way to, well, and another problem, as you're coming down Fillmore, there's this strange grid, there's these strange grids that would be, it makes it look like it's a 4-lane. There's room for 4-lane so that the person that's going to go up the hill can pull over like that instead of getting into this traffic. He can be over here, but legally they can't. And I watched an accident where a woman pulled over there, and then this woman here who appeared to be going that way or that way, she decided she was going to turn. Well, actually she was in the right. But the way it's configured down there, it's extremely dangerous because people do and should be able to pull up, because then they can go and they don't have to be part of the congestion. They can go when it's clear. So I think somehow or another, and I believe Timmy and I talked about it. I don't know if it's an ODOT issue because it's on Fillmore, but it's definitely impacting that traffic light.
Well, we probably manage the intersection anyway because of the traffic signal light, and you're right, Mayor. The just looking at the crash rates and the crashes here, Fillmore is probably your biggest, has the most crashes there. So definitely something that we want to look at as part of this TSP and figure out what we need to do to make it work right.
Can I add something quickly? I walk from 4th Street Southeast to Old Town sometimes for work. And I would add that it's a very big pedestrian risk there, because even though I always wait until I have the walk signal to cross, there are many drivers that don't respect the fact that I have the right of way. And I had 3 or 4 incidences where I almost got hit with me walking at the right time.
Yeah.
So if something could be timed differently or something.
I've seen 3 in the last 6 months where pedestrians were almost hit
Near,
by somebody making a turn.
right.
As a tangent and the safety issue on 101, is it strictly the responsibility of Bandon PD to enforce traffic regulations, or is that also a state responsibility, or could be a state responsibility?
Well, the state, you mean the state police? as far as
State police,
enforcement? Well, the
yes,
state
I'm saying-
police can obviously, they can write tickets there, but.
Can we ask for assistance from the state police, or do they have their own agenda or lack of resources?
I
Well,
think-
they're out of the Coos Bay office, I
Yeah.
think, is where they're out of. So they have a lot of highways, so
Right,
that
yeah, of course.
they manage and go on. So I can't speak for the state police, but certainly they can. But Bandon can also,
Mhm.
whether it's on the highway or not. Yeah.
Sure.
But maybe it needs to be some kind of reconfiguration to make it safer rather than worry about, but yeah, you're right. Jim Prohl told me the other day that he's almost been hit 3 or 4 times in that same intersection. And a lot of people walk there, which makes it even more dangerous.
I've
And
been across it and seen it. Yeah. So, yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Just the intersection with US 101, you said Street Southeast?
This is the one over by the cheese factory, the
Okay,
Fillmore Avenue. Yeah.
okay, at the Fillmore intersection.
Yep,
Okay,
yep.
thank you.
well, I have another question. As you know, we get a lot of complaints about when people pull off Seabird onto the highway. And we were wondering if there was ever a chance if if that would warrant a traffic light. But then we understand that maybe because of the safety issue of the dip that comes on the highway, goes like this. And if it would require, we understood it might require a bridge to go across the highway. So it would make it prohibitive from the cost standpoint.
I don't think so, but it is a difficult one to signalize. And I'm unclear right now whether it actually meets warrants or not. I know we had a traffic impact study from a developer that indicated in the past that it did meet warrants. And I think our analysis during the TSP shows it doesn't meet warrants. So, but it has to meet a traffic signal warrant to be able to be approved by the state traffic engineer. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, yes, you have that vertical curve. You know, the hill right there immediately afterwards. So, you know, there would probably be some type of fill or something to do, but it's a difficult intersection to signalize, partially because of that hill. You'd have to do some stuff, partially because there's no fourth leg on the other side. So if that was developed or something was going on there, that would help it meet warrants. So it's always harder to meet it when you're just coming from one side of a highway,
Right, right.
which is the problem there. Yeah.
You know, I've seen two reports from Parametrics, two different reports. One has it as a level of service D at the Seabird 101, and one has it as a C. What is ODOT's? Do you know off the top of your head? I know we're just talking one intersection in a long stretch.
Well, I know it meets our standards. We use what's called volume over capacity. So we're measuring kind of a level of congestion. When you're using a level of service, that measures delay. So you're kind of comparing apples and oranges. Does it take longer to get out? Yes. But are you congested? Is there congestion there? No. So it depends on the type of measurement
Sure,
that you're
makes
using,
sense.
but it does meet our standard, yes.
Thank you.
So I guess, you know, for us, some of the things as we look through here is, you know, what are the important components to 101 that you want to see or you would like to see or see evaluated in your transportation system plan, particularly when we talk about pedestrian crossings, when we talk about the bicycle system. If you have an opportunity to ride, if you ride bikes, you know, e-bikes are certainly becoming more popular and more people are going on those. But if you're on a bike in a road that's busy or has higher speeds or has trucks, we have what's called a level of traffic stress, so another type of measurement for bicycles on how comfortable do you feel? How comfortable do you feel bringing your family? How comfortable do you feel having some of the tourists with their families and kids, you know, travel the roadways and get across the roadways? So as you think about, you know, what you want to accomplish as a city, think about how people move and how comfortable you want people to feel in getting around. And that'll help direct the consultants and the project team in terms of looking at different types of alternatives that they can bring forward to the public and to you.
I don't want to criticize ODOT, but the new entryway from Chicago down in past the visitor center, where it used to be people could come from both sides. Well, now I see them coming there and almost hitting that. I think it's going to be a learning curve as to, because you definitely changed it. And I was also surprised, I guess, and apparently this was at the city's request, that you put another flashing signal down there just east of Chicago to apparently take care of the eventual parking lot that the former city manager had planned to put on this side of the highway. But it took us so long to get the one at 9th, and I believe we had to pay half of it, if I'm not mistaken. And yet all of a sudden, this one just kind of surfaced down there, and I don't know if we paid anything.
You might not have, I don't know though. I don't
Huh?
know the answer to that.
I was just
Yeah.
amazed at how long it took to get the one that was really important up there at 9th. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like overnight, here comes another one, which I don't know that I've ever seen anybody use. And maybe once we get a parking lot developed over here, if we do, then it will be utilized. But it just seemed like it's so hard to get something done. And then all of a sudden, when you barely even ask for it, it appears. And I think it's a little confusing to people to see that there, because you don't know where they're coming from, because
Right.
there's no parking lot visible or anything. You would, oh, right in the middle of, but anyway, we're glad you did something, but it was surprising. It was just surprising.
It's phased. Yeah, that's phased development. Any other questions or comments? Thank you.
Thank you.
Call you back up here if we need you.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike. I can bring the presentation back up, but actually that was, I think, basically all of our content for you. So we've talked here a little bit about 101, but I wanted to open it up more broadly to the things that Emily and I covered earlier too. You know, did what we talk about resonate with you in terms of the needs and issues? What things are we missing or should we consider, or other thoughts do you have about needs and issues that should be addressed in the transportation system plan?
And the questions or the discussion guiding questions are in here if you turn a few more pages, so.
Right, I think some questions that we wanted to particularly focus on, definitely looking at US 101, especially kind of safety with bicycle and pedestrian routes and crossings, and then traffic safety for all users in the areas that we just were talking about with high crash issues.
And maybe one question on our list, and I can bring these back up, it's just, if I don't have the presentation up, I can actually see your smiling faces. Is if there's one thing you could change, what would it be? And I'd offer that to the group as a question.
Anywhere in town or just on the 101?
Anywhere.
Anywhere in town.
Can you, if you're gonna ask a question though, can you grab the mic? Sorry, you guys are all sharing one. Oh, just a question.
Oh.
Okay.
I'll
Sorry.
ask a question, please. Do we know if Coos County Transit is in a position to support expansion for service to Bandon, or when was the last time we looked at a need for that? I know they have a route, for example, Coke Hill to Myrtle Point that they run from Mondays through Friday. So I don't know if that's type of a schedule is feasible, if we've looked at how many people would use it. I think the statistics show that about 17% of the city residents don't have access to a vehicle. So I don't know if that necessitates or is a reason to look at a cost of a transit system. And I would think if we were Coos County, piggybacking onto them would be a lot more cost effective perhaps than trying to come up with our own.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'll start. Emily, you can jump into it if you have thoughts here. But you know, when we did look at what Coos County's transit development plan has on the books for the future service development, and there are a few items related to Bandon, but I wouldn't say that there is necessarily a major expansion in like fixed route service planned currently. You know, I think the TSP process is an opportunity for the city to articulate what the transit needs are, so that we can facilitate a conversation with them about that. So that's great, highlighting that need, and that is absolutely something we'll look at more here when we get to solutions.
I guess if I had a desire, it would be to figure out a way to reconfigure Fillmore and Highway 101 to add some kind of a safety lane in there.
I have a couple of questions. On your review here, it says two things. US 101 within city limits does not have buffered sidewalks per ODOT standards. And the number of accesses on US 101 generally exceeds standards within city limits. Now, what do those two things mean? I mean, to what we have to do, what we can do, how do they affect us?
Yeah, and I'll start, and I don't know if Mike's still up there, but I imagine Mike will want to chime in here as well. But accesses, so the state maintains standards about the number of accesses to the state highway that they're trying to maintain, right? The accesses are an issue, right? Because the more accesses you have, the more traffic churn there is, and the more risk there is because of turning vehicles in and out, things like that, right? So the state maintains certain standards for the number of accesses to manage that risk on state highways. And then the other comment you noted there about the highway missing bicycle facilities per state standard. And we have a slide on this too. Mike, I can bring this up if you're up there around blueprint for urban design. But the state design manual has considerations for how state highways, especially in urban areas, should be improved to accommodate all users. And for this type of facility, the state design standards would prefer a separated bicycle facility in general for much of the length of Bandon. A separated meaning a bicycle lane with some sort of buffer, whether it's striping or you've seen those vertical candlesticks, things like that, to separate bicycle users from traffic.
How about the sidewalks though? Says it doesn't have buffered sidewalks.
Yeah, and that again is ideally the sidewalks would have some separation from traffic as well, like with a landscape buffer.
Okay.
Or if you had bike lanes, you know, that were curb adjacent, then, you know, potentially you could have a small strip of pavement that, you know, is a buffer to the bicyclist, so they feel safer, but that also provides a buffer to the pedestrians as well. Yeah. And then sidewalk widths, I think our width standard is typically about 6 feet, but the width we go to is your width. So I know in some cities it's like 7 feet, and so that'll be the standard that we would build to.
Okay.
And Ryan, do you think maybe could you send us an image, and I can send it out to everyone after this, of like what that preferred design looks like, or the standard design, just so they have an idea?
Yeah, why don't I'll send like a real world example that's been built. So that's probably
Okay.
the best illustration.
Perfect.
Yeah, the trick here is in the width of the highway. So there just isn't, this is a highway that we used to build that was focused solely on cars and trucks.
Right.
We put sidewalks in and then we popped a utility pole right in the middle of it. So, we didn't think about those things back then. And so the thought process is quite a bit different now. We're really looking at all the modes and how they work together and in that highway prism. But how do we accommodate it? How do we retrofit something? We're not likely to widen through here. That's an expensive proposition, involves rebuilding a lot of the highway, probably would impact a lot of adjoining properties, which is something I would imagine is not favorable. And so how do we accommodate it? And so that's what we look at, is how do we make the best of, it might not be to the best, biggest standard, that we might if we were building a new highway. But how do we fit it? How do we reach your goals and make people safe?
So what you're saying is that the elephant in the room is how to handle freight traffic and then accommodate everything else.
Well, there are certainly some statutes around freight, but really it's how do you balance all of that? It really isn't freight over everything and then everything else. It's everything. How do you accommodate all of it and make sure that people are safe? We could reduce the number of lanes here and not have congestion and still get freight through. But it has to be something that's acceptable to the public as well. So we recognize that. So how do you balance all of that? And that's really what this process is all about, is, we see your goals and we hear the concerns, and safety was a huge factor in the public comments that we received in this process so far. And people wanting to bike and walk, which is understandable. This is a tourist driven economy here, at least in the summertime. I don't know, maybe it is all year. I come in the summer. But how do you do that? How do you accommodate all of that and make people feel safe and comfortable while they're doing it? That's the trick. And that's what we're here to talk about. And I think they talked also about highway context. So we have some, as we repave our roads and, we take a look at the highway, the what it's there to serve, and and we're having to make decisions later on too. So we might be repaving 101 in say another 10 years or so. But before then, we'd like to have an idea of what it is you guys want to do. How do we accommodate everybody?
What was the thought process up there at 13th, at Highway 101 and 13th, where people are speeding? Well, if they'd slow down, they wouldn't be speeding through town, but they're speeding through town and then all of a sudden it narrows down to 1 right there at 13th or this side of 13th. Is that,
Because your traffic volumes are low enough, so so it went from a 5-lane to basically a 3-lane configuration, and partly it's just because of the less amount of development that's in that area. But also just looking at your projected traffic volumes, your volumes are so low. A 3-lane facility will handle almost as much as a 4-lane facility will. And you guys are way under those volumes throughout the community. And so it was an application, I think, that was filled out by the city of Bandon at one time and was presented to the Area Commission on Transportation. And they ended up funding that. So I felt it was a priority to be able to put some sidewalks and get some bike lanes in.
Yeah.
So that's what happened there.
well, I can assure you that we definitely don't want a road diet. And after seeing what's happened in Reedsport, we're friends with, the mayor and the people in Reedsport. And I mean, they're just heartsick over people actually try to avoid Reedsport because of the road diet. And I mean, those problems hadn't surfaced when ODOT at first proposed it, that this is the way we should go. But we were still hesitant, and thank heavens we were hesitant, because if we had a Reedsport, we'd really have a problem.
Yeah, you guys are a bit different than Reedsport, so they work some places and other places they don't work.
Want to be one of the experiments.
And and that's why we want to take a look at it. So in Reedsport, volumes were already at that top high level for a 3-lane. So difficult. They had 4 lanes of traffic, no center turn lane. I think it was four lanes of traffic, parking, no bike lanes. And they have Winchester Bay, so immediately to their south. So they have the dunes and the dune access. And that creates a lot of traffic with RVs and, all the hauling, all the ATVs and things like that over there. So a bit different situation because your volumes are quite a bit lower than theirs. And they have that traffic that would come back from the dunes, and that was what was creating the backup. We are actually still not going back to 4 through lanes. We are going back to 3 lanes and a center turn lane.
Because they thought you were going to help correct it. I mean, they were hoping, and they thought that in the
Right.
future they were going to.
Right. So they were working with the city, and so that's why I always say that if you want to even look at it, that you should always put it in as a temporary. So so that way we have a chance to evaluate it and then reverse it if it doesn't work. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think
Anyway,
one of the lessons I think that we've learned is it works better if it's a temporary measure at first. So we did it up in Coquille, up in the Coquille to Myrtle Point area. You've probably driven through that. But we did it as a test. So we did a striping product on there. So we put that down. Then we went out with surveys and with open houses to the public to
Sure.
gather public comment. It did come back positive, so we ended up leaving it. But if it had come back negative, we would have put the new overlay on and put it back the way it was.
If it was something that was community initiated, then it might have more success rather than ODOT coming in and saying, this is the way we think you should go.
Right. And that's why we came back to do the TSP is if it's going to happen, then it's got to be community. We want it to be community initiated. If you don't want it, we're not going to force it on you. But we do want to look at how do we solve those problems now? What do we do? How do we cross? What are some of the other alternatives that we could do to make pedestrians or bicyclists feel safer? Maybe we're going to keep it status quo and there's just not going to be any bike lanes and for now. I can't promise it'll stay that way because when we repave the highway, we're under certain requirements to do things too. So it's a difficult conversation, and that's why we're here.
Well, we all know that everybody would like to have the speed control through town. The police know how we feel. We all feel that way. Same with Seabird. But we can't have a police officer on every corner. It would be nice if we could, but unfortunately we can't. And Port Orford, for example, became known as a speed trap because they had, I don't know how much money they were generating from pinching people, excuse me, arresting them or citing them. But they got a reputation of being a speed trap. And frankly, I wish that we had that reputation because maybe they would slow down. But so far, we haven't generated enough citations to get that reputation. But yeah, in the summertime, I mean, you could stop, you could pinch people one after another, and it doesn't do a thing because they're all coming from somewhere else and it's not your locals. I mean, your locals are, you can at least enforce the locals, but it's really hard to stop when you're a main arterial through. Yeah.
Although, I have noticed that flashing speed sign out there, I've noticed that helps a lot.
Well, I think it does.
People, because I mean, myself, sometimes I'll come around the corner, come down, went, oh, geez.
Yeah.
Yeah, it says 30 miles, I'm doing 35 or something. I go, oh, and
Yeah.
slow down. Because a lot of times you don't even think about it and that
Mhm.
reminds you. And I've noticed, especially the big pickups that come
Yeah.
roaring down there. I've even noticed some of those guys slowing down a little bit.
See, he's right, and that's not a very expensive way to slow people down, really. It just reminds, so many of us are just, I guess people just get distracted. But when you see that flashing light and it says 30 miles an hour and you're going, oops, I'm going 40, you slow down. And
Yeah. Most of us don't pay attention to traffic control signs, speed signs, which is one of the reasons they have those flashing lights. to
Right,
help,
unless it's flashing, you don't.
warn people
your
to,
attention.
well, the pedestrians are present that are
You-
crossing the road.
You know,
But you also don't want an over abundance of those or people begin to ignore those too.
Right.
I used to work
Yeah.
in mines, and one of the things that they did so that people would notice the sign, and they don't keep working, but they work for a while, is 35.25 miles an hour. That's what the sign will say. And people go, what? But they see the sign then.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I do have some thoughts about the street standards off of the 101. We're seeing a lot of new development along substandard streets. And I'm wondering if there's ways to put more of the onus on the developers who are bringing a lot more volume to those areas that maybe can't sustain it at this point. How do we continue to develop with substandard streets? Or do we have a plan for that?
And sorry, just to make sure I understand the issue, is it that when new development is coming in, new streets are not being built to a standard that actually works?
No, they're being built along streets that are substandard. There's no sidewalk, there's
I see.
there's just no room for it. And so without putting a moratorium on development, how do we manage this safely?
Yeah.
There's some major safety concerns specifically along Beach Loop.
Yeah, if I can hop in and just answer, or at least I think explain, we've got some local streets and Mary might, or someone else who's here longer than I am can remind me, but there was a period of time in which a lot of our streets were gravel.
Yeah.
And the city got a grant in which they were able to pave the streets, but they were to a pretty minimum standard. A very minimum standard. And so a majority of our local streets don't have any facilities, even curb, gutter, sidewalk, that sort of thing. And we do allow someone to build a house, like on a vacant lot, abutting one of those substandard streets. We don't require them to like sign a non-remonstrance agreement or anything like that to participate in a future build of a sidewalk unless it's on Beach Loop Drive or Seabird. So I think, I mean, I guess that's something that the city council could consider in the TSP update as a standard to require the construction of sidewalks on local streets if you wanted to do something like that.
The only thing I could add is that in California, we would often require any new developments that were entitled to be responsible for the extent of the public improvements that bordered their development. So if the project was built on a collector street that required new pedestrian enhancements and or any additional public improvements, the developer would be responsible for implementing and installing those improvements. That will extend to private residential property owners if they are developing property that's adjacent to a collector or arterial street. They then would be required to incur the cost of those improvements. And that's how we would approach mitigating those impacts with the objective of creating a connected, comprehensive pedestrian transportation plan in collaboration with, I think, the complete streets model that I think ODOT is contemplating at this point. With that said, that hasn't been done here in Bandon. Moving forward, there is the possibility to require that on new developments. What you can't do is overburden a developer to do improvements that are well beyond the impacts that they generate.
That's right.
And if there's no direct nexus to that, that could very well position the city to potential litigation.
Mhm.
And so that's just as additional background as to how we would have dealt with it in California.
Unfortunately, with our streets, like we all know, we'll have a vacant lot and then we'll have 10 lots that are built out, then another vacant lot. So you're gonna have a developer required to do curb and gutter here, 10 lots down, curb and gutter. So it does no good. It's like, if I was a developer, that's a big waste of money.
Yeah, the idea is that over time, those implements or improvements would be completed.
Well, yeah.
And if there were, opportunities for funding, the city could then come in and do some additional improvements to provide the connections to fill in the gaps that exist. But if there are no measures implemented at any time, then moving forward, that condition will remain. So it's just a matter of, moving forward with established and approved development standards. And that could be done in collaboration with ODOT, or we could, as a city, develop those standards and require them as part of our public works improvements. But if you don't start, you'll never complete a comprehensive plan. And I think here in Bandon, from what I've observed, is a new resident is that people are very active. They enjoy exercising. They enjoy the fitness and ability to go out and recreate. So the idea is, does it make sense to have dedicated pedestrian sidewalks or pathways that separate them from vehicular traffic as a matter of public safety? And that's a decision I think that electeds would have to make.
What we don't want to do, though, is we don't want to start into a process that will discourage people from building houses.
Right.
Because the state is, they are on a complete fast track to get housing, and we are just as bad, if not worse off than many communities, and we don't want to start. This is not the time to redo our ordinance to tell people that they have to build on, standard streets, because it definitely would discourage housing, and we just have to suck it up until we get some housing here so that our people can afford to live here.
And just as an added matter of clarification, for every development that's entitled, there are SDC fees, and these are fees that are used to construct improvements. They're one-time fees that are generated through the development process. They are not reoccurring ongoing fees that we would then use to maintain these improvements. But we do have SDCs that are set in place to help pay for first-time improvements in the public right-of-way.
Any other thoughts, questions, or some people we haven't heard from yet?
I would just like to add again, as the newest resident to this community and a new employee here with the city, I see opportunities for 101 to be improved. From what I've gathered here, we're not contemplating a road diet per se, but what we're looking at is improving the full extent of that public right of way to accommodate complete streets. And that would, as an avid road cyclist for 25 years, I thought about bringing my bike out here, but because of the layout,
I wouldn't.
and looking at the 101 additional collector streets, I didn't perceive it to be as safe for me to ride the road bike. And that's hard to say after living in Southern California and riding along PCH for many years. But with that said, I think the opportunity for there to be sensible, responsible improvements to the 101, for me, public safety, pedestrian safety is paramount. Vehicular safety, avoiding traffic accidents, with the idea of developing a comprehensive roadway system on the 101 that would ensure those types of safety measures and also help to facilitate new reuse along existing developed properties on the 101. So I think that in the nexus of facilitating new reuse and development on the 101 would be paramount.
And has there been discussion of safe routes to schools as part of this? I don't see how many of the kids can ride their bikes safely to school or walk to school or even bus stops. So I would really like to see that looked at.
Yeah, so we looked at the Safe Routes to School plan that was developed. Dana, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure if it was published or finalized. But we did look at that plan when we were looking at improvements in the kind of school campus area, in particular, looking at sidewalks and crossings. So because the Safe Routes to School plan already looked at so many of the really important areas near the schools, we heavily referenced that plan when we were kind of seeing what the connections are potentially going to be in that area.
I think close to the school, it's relatively safe, but anyone crossing the highway or coming from, there's a lot of neighborhoods along Seabird. Like maybe a green belt would be great.
Some additional things I'll add as part of the workforce housing development that the city is collaborating with the school district and a private developer on. We are currently looking at competing for a grant for complete streets and safe access to schools that would provide for improvements along that existing ball field area and provide those enhancements as part of that development project. In addition, as a community that's aging in place from a transportation standpoint, I had the privilege of operating one for Cerritos for many years, and it was fixed route and dollar ride. But with a aging community, what we found was that demand response was more successful and beneficial to the existing residential community. We are looking at opportunities to either renovate or restore the trolley with an ADA access lift. I have an appointment tomorrow afternoon to look at that potential. We have a fabricator out of Coos Bay coming out to look at it to determine whether or not it's even feasible. Separately, I'm looking at the opportunity, and this is with the support of the council, to pursue grant funding to purchase a trolley that would be fully ADA compatible. And with that, there may be opportunities to solicit matching funds from local special interest groups, whether it's a large developer in the surrounding area or another group that would be willing to contribute money towards the purchase of the vehicle. Now, the initial numbers I'm looking at is 220,000, and that's for a hybrid gas electric vehicle with the full trolley ADA accommodation. So those are things that we're looking at and currently in process. But from my experience, the dial ride would probably be more beneficial to local residents, and fixed route may not be a reality, but the trolley system and providing access to certain designations within the city and or adjacent surrounding areas would be beneficial.
And Catherine, sorry, I'll just answer your question just to clarify. We were successful in getting an Safe Routes to School project implementation plan, which was through the statewide Safe Routes to School program. And what it did was in the area eligible for Safe Routes to School construction grants, identified projects that would help. So I believe it did sort of focus on like the connection across Highway 101, 11th Street, and Emily knows all the projects. And like she said, they're all in our plan or heavily referenced to come up with a new plan. And I think what Tori's talking about is the Safe Routes to School construction grant that opens in the spring that we could apply for that funding. Yeah.
There's also this not official route that quite a few kids take, like if you go up sort of through the park, it's just a dirt road, but it could be like a green belt or
I think it's through private property.
yeah.
That someone, it's a desire.
It's not official.
Yeah.
You know, You might be also, talking about transit, you might be able to talk with Coos County Transit and look at it as a micro transit, maybe something that they can apply for in their updated STIF plan to operate, maybe it's between Memorial Day and Labor Day or something, the peak of the tourist season for something like that. They might be able to put a project in their STIF plan for that.
Yeah, it's a great idea. I think with Bandon being in the future, I think more centered and focused on a tourism economy. The idea to band together with adjacent communities and to promote the transportation of patrons that would support Bandon, local businesses, and everything that we have to offer, I think would be a win-win situation.
It almost seems
That's
like a
great
no-brainer
suggestion.
for that.
I'll say guaranteed by ODOT.
Yeah. I'm on the transit board in Douglas County. So, yeah. The, one other grant that we're looking at, very seriously is, what is it? It's a pedestrian bridge across the Cocoa River at Bullards there. So to connect the, Bullard State Park with, coming into town, for bicycle and pedestrians. So, it's called a RAISE grant. There's only usually maybe one or two in the state, that are given out infrequently. We've had a couple of them. They're usually big projects, 20 million or so. So we're applying for those again. So that is one of the highest priorities for ODOT in this region. And I think we were able to submit it in the state. We only submitted a few of them in the state. So it's a big priority for the state.
When will you know?
I think we just put together probably next year or end of this year. So they take a while. They're very extensive applications.
So I might as well ask, does ODOT have any funding for a trolley?
Well, the money that Coos County Transit gets comes from the state, so, or from the, it comes from your employment tax, actually. So, there will be an opportunity to update the STIF plan, in the next, is it this coming year or next, anyway, this year or next year, I think, for maybe like 27 to 30 timeframe. So, wouldn't hurt to get it in, but I certainly think that would be a real viable. I don't know what their finances look like or what their other projects and priorities are, but certainly would seem like that would be a huge priority and kind of a big win for them to add some ridership and in an area like this. So.
I have one quick question before I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Is there a desire to try to keep RVs this summer out of the new parking lot on First Street, or or is our thought now, because of the situation off of Alabama, that area will be open for visitor use, especially RVs?
I may or may not be the right person to answer this question, but so you're referring to the city's new lot on
Yes.
Fillmore.
Yes.
And we haven't, that was only available last year for the summer, I believe, maybe winter and summer. And we did have a lot of RVs that used the pull-through parking spaces for the full extent of their RV, like 40 feet long or whatever that was. I don't think that we took any action on people parking like that. But yeah, there wasn't anywhere else to park for most of the summer. The city had a sort of long-term vision to accommodate RV parking elsewhere. We talked about that in the streetscape plan. It's come up a little bit here. I don't know if there's any, I'm looking at you. Any talk about the gravel lot becoming available this summer for public parking?
I haven't heard of anything at this point, but I know that city staff has been directed by the council to look at opportunities for expanding downtown parking. The thought there is that if there is some additional parking that's available in and around the Old Town area, that would then allow for additional, intensification within the downtown area for commercial retail uses. And with that, help revitalize and stimulate that area from an economic development standpoint. The parking lot that's been referenced, we've talked that really it's intended to supplement the downtown or old town businesses. If there is the ability to get the local businesses to require that their employees park in that satellite parking lot and to leave the prime parking within Old Town for patrons, that would definitely, I think, be beneficial for people visiting and patronizing the businesses in Old Town. So there are some thoughts about opportunities to acquire and assemble more parking with the purpose of revitalizing and intensifying Old Town. And I'll defer to the mayor if she has anything else to add.
Well, so are we talking about the gravel parking lot that Marriott has put half down on?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking there aren't many places for RVs to park. So we have a few RV parking spaces in the Alabama
Right.
parking lot. But a lot of the RVs or the travel trailers pulled by giant trucks
You know
are
what?
are a
There's
lot
one down
bigger.
there. I saw one that took up almost the entire Fillmore parking lot, just the way they
Yeah.
parked right smack in the middle. They weren't in any designated area. They just took up the parking lot.
Mhm.
And there was one down there a few weeks ago that stayed for 4 days. So they were camping down there. And I think we at least need to put some sign, this is not on this subject, but we need to sign that it's no overnight parking
Mhm.
or camping. We don't want tents on it.
Yeah, I don't know though if there's another place for them to go. We've also gotten some complaints from business owners in Old Town when RVs are parking in the on-street parking. Cause a lot of times, one, it blocks views, so like river views for restaurants down there, and it takes up more than one parking space,
Right.
which is really
Wasn't
challenging.
the gravel lot by Face Rock Creamery intended for RV parking at one time?
Well,
for
but that,
overflow?
there's a little, that lot was purchased by Face Rock Creamery. But in the agreement that we signed, which I just found a few weeks ago, there is a stipulation in there that even if they develop it, that the parking remains public. So, last summer, I drove by there and I saw a sign, some signs put up there that said, parking for Cheese Factory customers only, others will be towed. Well, then I immediately made contact with, at that time it was Daniel Graham was part of it. And I said, that's not true. This is public parking and you need to take those signs down. Well, we negotiated, there were a couple of weeks and the signs were still up. And so then I found the information that said clearly that that's the way we had negotiated it. So they took the signs down. So I think it's understandable, but I don't know how much we should encourage parking. I don't want to overstep our authority, but it definitely says in there that that parking lot will remain open for the public, even if they develop it.
So I think to answer your question, there's no designated RV parking.
That's right. There is no
Other than the Alabama parking lot, which has a few spaces. So that could be something that we think about in the TSP is where could we accommodate that in the future? Or the streetscape, the Old Town streetscape plan.
And I think for parking in and around Old Town, the priority would be to support the local businesses.
Yeah.
And there may be more suitable locations that could accommodate RV parking, and we'll put some thought into that.
Mhm. Okay, I'm looking around to see if there's any more questions, comments, thoughts. I want to ask, how many more meetings will we have in this joint session? Is it one or two? Two.
Two
Okay,
more.
so this is just sort of the first, this is your introduction to the transportation system plan. We'll have more opportunities to provide input, but one of the things that the project team has talked about is Highway 101 and how do we balance all needs. So I think between now and our next meeting, you all should think very critically about how we might do that, because it sounds like there's no way to get everything that we want. We're going to have to compromise somewhere. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan. But it sounds like we couldn't really fit everything that's both required and what we have now. So we've talked a little bit, and hopefully there'll be more presentation to you in the future, but it's not an all or nothing. So it's not, we either do nothing to Highway 101 or we go full road diet. There's a spread of options, and that's what we're working on now, is to come up with some more choices for you. But if you have any input for us about how we might prioritize users on Highway 101 or different modes. I think that would be great feedback. Also, parametrics team, correct me if I'm wrong, but I wanted to leave the survey, the online open house open maybe till the end of this week if we could. If any city councilors or planning commissioners did not get an opportunity to provide comment and wanted to.
I didn't know anything about it.
I think if we kept it open even longer than that, there's only 31 responses.
Mhm.
Like month.
We sent it out on the city's website and on the
know anything
Facebook
about
page. It went out in newsletters and notices and the planning department updates. I've signed all of you up for that, but I am happy to walk you through how to do it. There were some questions about how to make it work. We need it, but I don't know. Emily, tell me if it's still available.
I did close it, but I can definitely open it back up again. We wanted to kind of, because we're kind of closing the existing conditions and issues and needs element of this, we're gonna kind of wrap that up, and then the next phase would be the improvements. However, if it feels like there are some folks who wanted to contribute some of the issues and need aspects, we can definitely open that back up.
Well, maybe informal poll, who would take the survey if it was
Let me
open?
ask you a question, Dana. How was this survey originally advertised? I as a council I didn't know anything about it. Mary didn't know anything about it. She's the mayor.
It went out via the newsletters and notices on the city's website. We did post flyers around town as well. You would have gotten an email.
I got an email and everything.
But we are happy to keep it open. So it sounds like there's some interest in taking it. So Emily, if we could maybe keep it open for like another week or two, and I'll help you figure out how to take it if you have any questions.
Okay, email me a link, Dana.
Okay, I will.
Too.
But I believe they're still on the city's website too, so I can just send you the page for the TSP. And you can find all the information.
Okay.
And I realize it might be a little late for this, but we had an online open house. I think there's a lot of citizens that maybe online wouldn't be the best way to get their input. Did we think about doing an in-person open house?
I didn't know about that either.
We did talk about doing an in-person open house, but because this was sort of just we have a limited time and resources, so we had to sort of choose where we would focus our energies. We thought people might be more interested in providing input about the improvements that we chose versus the existing conditions. So the existing conditions portion you'll see when you're on there is like saying where the issues were, which people definitely have opinions about, but our town's not that big. I think everyone sort of knows what the general problems are. And so the second open house will give you an opportunity to comment on what we might do in the future to fix them. So we thought there might be more interest from the public to be in person for that.
People find out about the open house on the city website again?
Yeah, so we would send out notice on the city's website. So anyone who signed up that way, we do post it on the Facebook page. And then we have the flyers posted around town.
Isn't in the city manager newsletter also?
I think I'm not sure.
I haven't written on it, but I will.
Needs to
That'll
be in
be-
the
Mhm.
Topic.
Yeah, I think that was maybe the prior city manager.
Yes, that might be. We did try to get the word out and I talked about it at all of our meetings. It was in your city council packet. So, I mean, we tried to put it out there as much as we could, but unless you're talking directly to someone, it can be really hard to make sure that they know that it's happening. So, if you have suggestions about how we might get the word out in the future, Mary's column is probably the best place.
Yeah. And the city's Facebook page too.
Yes, we will do that. Thank you.
I'm curious, if we go out there, can we see the comments that are there?
I believe you can. Yeah, the comments are.
You can see the comments on the comment map. However, the surveys are anonymous and just go to the back end, but you can see the comments on the map.
Okay.
So are you saying that only 31 people filled this out?
Yes.
Well, then obviously
not a lot of people knew
didn't
about it.
have a lot of broad
Well,
circulation.
how does that relate to other ones?
Well, so I think this is different. So I did give parametrics a little bit of feedback that when I walked through it with our Parks and Rec Commission, that there were some folks answered questions but couldn't figure out how to use the map. There were some things that you had to click on. That's why I said I would walk you through it. Some of our other surveys that we've sent out have been far less detailed. They've just been, answering a question. And we do get a lot more responses on those. So I think it could possibly be because this one is just a more complicated topic too, that it's not as approachable as maybe, food carts or something that people are more excited about.
Well, I would also tend to say that since it is a difficult one to take,
Mhm.
people will go in and just leave.
That is the feedback I got from some people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So It's hard when we are looking for a specific type of response, though. There's only so many ways that you can get that.
Right.
And so the surveys we've done before where it's just sort of a yes or no, or a multiple choice, you're right, are just easier to answer, period. So we can try multiple formats next time. I think this is really good feedback.
Yeah, this is really good for us to know because we try to kind of have a mix of multiple choice and open-ended response questions. But if anyone kind of feels like one might be easier than the other, while you take a look at the survey, if you have any feedback for us on which survey questions might kind of deter people from filling out the whole thing, that's all really great information for us to know for the next round, for the next open house.
And also the majority of our population's age group and working computers and difficult things.
Mhm. I did talk to the library that next time we'll do some like open, like it's online open house, but you can meet with us in person to go through the survey. We'll help people walk through it.
That would be
I
good.
heard that feedback afterwards. But I mean, I do think it's harder, like the mobile food unit survey said, do you want to see food carts here? Yes or no? This, when you go through it, you'll see as more of a presentation because they did sort of, you know, what they gave you today, all the background information, and then you're asked to answer questions at the end. So probably that format, just people don't want to read.
Right. No, we
So
know our population.
maybe we can make a for beginners one or a more advanced and look and see if there's some options there. Okay.
Prize or something.
Yeah, we could. Maybe some cookies from the baking company.
Bakery cookie.
The free electricity.
Ooh.
No.
So does anybody else have any comments
You should.
before we adjourn? If
Yeah.
not,
I would just leave you
Good for
with this. As a landscape architect and an urban planner, I would just ask everybody to look at this objectively. And this is an opportunity, I think, for commissioners, council members, community members, residents, professionals to look at an opportunity to create an environment that they would like Bandon to become from a walkable, pedestrian friendly community to one that also accommodates a mixed mode of transit, whether it be bikes. It is very concerning that the width, I think, of the 101 right of way, and what's the extent of the width of your right of way at that location?
I don't know what the actual width, I mean, but generally it's just think of it as what you see from curb to curb. That's, in
Yes.
terms of outside of just the sidewalk. That's what we have. That's all we have. There really isn't enough room for bike lanes.
Right.
Even if we can narrow up the lanes, but we can't narrow them up enough to put bike lanes in.
And still, it's impressive and intimidating for pedestrians across that street. So those are things that I think we all just need to think about. What can we do to make the community better moving forward? And sooner or later, you're going to have to start. And there's no better time than now.
So since ODOT can't make a bike lane there, basically, is there any precedent for taking a detour? So leave the 101 at Seabird, create a dedicated bike path all the way along Beach Loop to Old Town. Get people off we can't bike here. We literally can't.
So in the state of Oregon, under the Oregon Constitution, gas tax, which is what we spend, is not eligible outside of the right of way. So there is no funding actually available for something like that. Sometimes we do look at parallel routes,
Yeah.
on a different street. So you have Fillmore, it's kind of up the hill. So sometimes there are opportunities like that. In Roseburg, we ended up, also didn't have room. We ended up widening one side of the sidewalk, took a sidewalk out to 10 feet and turned that into essentially a multi-use path. So it was bikes and pedestrians. So yeah, there are options. And there are going to be drawbacks. So I just want to caution you, the next time you meet, you'll be looking at a set of alternatives, and some you're going to like and some you're not going to like, and that's okay. They're presented for your review and your comment and your information. We want you to know that we looked at it. It doesn't mean that they're all acceptable, but we want you to be able to help identify what's important to you. But there are drawbacks. We're in an urban area, and anytime you do improvements in an urban area, there are impacts. And you just have to figure out that what those trade-offs are and how important they are to you.
And don't forget to take, aren't those handouts there out by the door? Everybody should take one of those. Okay, I guess you'll let us know when the next meeting is. And I thought this was quite informative. Yeah, very good.
Thanks, Parametrics team.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Oh,
Take care.
I'm gonna meet with you real quick.
Okay.